November 1939. Britain has been at war for precisely 8 weeks, and something is killing ships in places where they should be completely safe. Not in the mid-Atlantic, where German U-boats prowl. Not in enemy waters where mines are expected. But here, in British harbours. In river estuaries. In channels the Royal Navy has swept for mines dozens of times. The numbers tell a chilling story. The 21st of November. HMS Gypsy, a destroyer with a crew of 145 men, steams through the Thames estuary. This is practically Britain's front doorstep. Waters the Royal Navy knows intimately. Then, without warning, a massive explosion tears through her hull amidships. Gypsy goes down in minutes. No torpedo wake, no periscope sighting, no warning whatsoever. 3 days later it happens again. The Japanese merchant ship SS Terukuni Maru explodes in the same stretch of water, then another vessel, and another. By early December, over a dozen ships have been destroyed in British home waters, and nobody has the faintest idea what's causing it. The Admiralty is baffled. These aren't torpedo attacks. There's no evidence of submarine activity in these shallow, heavily patrolled areas. These aren't traditional contact mines either. Minesweepers have combed these routes repeatedly, and found nothing. Ships are simply sailing along, carrying out routine operations, and then suddenly ceasing to exist in fountains of water and twisted steel. Panic begins to creep through British shipping. Merchant captains who faced U-boats in the Atlantic without flinching are now terrified to enter their own ports. Because at least with a U-boat you know what you're fighting. You can zigzag. You can deploy escorts. You can drop depth charges. But this is like fighting phantoms. Crews start calling the Thames estuary the death trap. Some merchant captains flatly refuse to sail through certain channels, even under direct orders. The losses mount through December and into January 1940. Then comes a moment that changes everything. The 13th of November. The battleship HMS Nelson, 33,000 tons of British naval power, flagship of the home fleet, hits something off Loch Ewe in Scotland. The explosion nearly rips her bow clean off. She barely limps into port, her forward compartments flooded, 400 men frantically working pumps to keep her afloat. If capital ships aren't safe, nothing is. Britain's ports are becoming graveyards, and the Royal Navy doesn't even know what's killing the vessels. More crucially, they don't know how to stop it. And whilst the Admiralty scrambles to understand this invisible threat, another crisis is building in the Atlantic, one that could strangle Britain entirely within months. March 1940. Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of Germany's U-boat fleet, is refining a tactic that will nearly win the war before it truly begins. The Wolfpack. Previously, submarines hunted alone, solitary predators stalking convoys. Donitz has transformed them into coordinated killing machines. Groups of U-boats hunting together, sharing intelligence, overwhelming convoy escorts through sheer numbers. His submarines don't fight fair. They strike at night, surfacing to attack in darkness, where British ASDIC sonar cannot detect them. A single torpedo can send a 10,000-ton freighter to the bottom in minutes. The crew, if they're fortunate, might have time to abandon ship before the freezing Atlantic claims them. The statistics are terrifying. In the first 4 months of 1940 alone, German U-boats send over 250 Allied vessels to the bottom of the Atlantic. That's not merely figures on an Admiralty chart. That's thousands of tons of food that will never reach British tables, fuel that will never power British factories, sailors who will never see home again. Britain imports roughly 55 million tons of supplies every year merely to survive. The island nation produces only about 30% of its own food. Without those convoys, the country faces starvation within months. Winston Churchill, who becomes Prime Minister in May 1940, will later write that the U-boat peril was the only thing that ever really frightened me during the war. Consider that for a moment. This is a man facing Nazi invasion, the Blitz, the fall of France, and what keeps him awake at night. The silent hunters prowling beneath the waves. British convoy commodores face impossible choices every single voyage: sail faster and leave the slower merchant ships vulnerable, zigzag to avoid torpedoes but burn precious fuel, stick together for protection, but present a larger target. Every decision could mean life or death for hundreds of men. By spring 1940, Britain's merchant fleet is dying faster than shipyards can replace it. The Royal Navy is stretched impossibly thin, attempting to escort convoys, hunt submarines and defend the homeland simultaneously. Destroyer captains are running their vessels into the ground, racing from one convoy to the next. There are never enough escorts to go around. Some convoys cross with only 1 or 2 warships protecting 30 or 40 merchant vessels. And here's what makes it infinitely worse. The German submariners are getting bolder. They're operating in groups now, sharing intelligence, calling in their packmates when they spot a convoy. One U-boat shadows the merchantman during daylight, transmitting position reports. Then at nightfall, 5 or 6 submarines converge for a coordinated attack. British sailors start hearing a phrase from intercepted German communications. The U-boat crews call this period Die glückliche Zeit, the happy time. For the Kriegsmarine, it's target practice. For the Allies it's a massacre. But the Wolfpacks aren't even the worst of Britain's problems. Because whilst Churchill and his admirals focus on the U-boat threat, another killer is lurking in the waters around Britain, one that doesn't hunt in packs, doesn't need a crew of 50 men, and strikes without warning in places where ships should be completely safe. And unlike U-boats, this weapon is completely invisible. The 22nd of November 1939, shortly after 9 o'clock in the evening, an anti-aircraft machine gun team stationed near Shoeburyness spots a German Heinkel He-59 seaplane flying low over the Thames estuary. They open fire. Tracer rounds light up the night sky. The German aircraft, caught in the searchlights, drops something by parachute and flees. The object drifts down, and lands not in the water, but on the mudflats at low tide. When dawn breaks and the tide recedes, British bomb disposal experts cautiously approach. What they discover is about to change everything. It's a mine. But unlike anything the Royal Navy has encountered before, no contact horns protruding from the casing, no visible detonation mechanism. It's sitting there in the mud, looking almost harmless, just a large cylindrical casing, slightly over 2 meters long, with a parachute harness still attached. Lieutenant Commander John Overy and his team are summoned from HMS Vernon, the Royal Navy's torpedo and mining school in Portsmouth. They spend hours carefully examining the weapon, acutely aware that one wrong move could vaporize them all, and Britain's only chance of understanding what's killing the ships. They work with freezing water lapping at their feet as the tide begins returning, racing against time, using non-magnetic tools, brass screwdrivers, wooden hammers. They begin to dismantle the mine's mechanisms. What they discover inside sends shockwaves through the Admiralty. This mine doesn't wait for a ship to bump into it. It doesn't require any physical contact whatsoever. Inside the waterproof casing sits something far more sinister, a magnetic sensor that detects the steel hull of passing vessels. When a ship sails overhead, the mine senses the magnetic field radiating from all that iron and steel. Once the field strength crosses a preset threshold, an electrical circuit closes, current flows to the detonator, and 300 kilograms of high explosive turn the seabed into a killing zone. The Germans have weaponized physics itself. Suddenly everything makes horrible sense. The shallow water attacks, the harbor explosions, the minesweepers sailing directly over the weapons without triggering them. Britain isn't just fighting submarines anymore. It's fighting an invisible enemy that turns every ship's own metal hull into a death sentence. On the 19th of December 1939, King George VI visits HMS Vernon to view the captured mine and personally decorate Overy and his team. These are the first Royal Navy decorations awarded in the Second World War. Overy receives the Distinguished Service Order. His team members receive DSOs, DSCs and DSMs. But whilst the ceremony provides a brief moment of triumph, everyone present understands the terrifying implications of what they've discovered. Germany has deployed hundreds, perhaps thousands of these weapons around the British Isles. They're sitting on the seabed right now, waiting, and Britain has no defense against them. Traditional minesweeping is useless. Wooden-hulled minesweepers, designed to avoid triggering contact mines, still have metal engines, metal propeller shafts, metal fittings. Enough steel to set off the magnetic sensors. The Royal Navy has lost several minesweepers precisely this way before understanding what was happening. The captured magnetic mine lands on the desk of a man who has absolutely no business being in the Royal Navy at all. Charles Goodeve is a Canadian chemistry professor who came to Britain on an academic fellowship before the war. He's not a military man. He's not a naval architect. He's a scientist who's been swept up in Britain's desperate scramble to mobilize every available brain against the Nazi threat. In late 1939, the Admiralty creates something called the Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development. It's essentially a clearinghouse for unconventional ideas, and the peculiar individuals who devise them. Goodeve fits right in. When the magnetic mine problem reaches his office in early 1940, most naval officers are thinking in traditional terms: build better minesweepers, develop stronger hull plating, map the minefields more carefully. These are sensible, logical approaches from experienced seamen. Goodeve examines the problem from an entirely different angle. He understands something the admirals don't. This isn't a naval problem, it's a physics problem. The mine doesn't care about armor thickness or ship design. It's responding to magnetic fields. Every vessel is essentially a giant magnet floating through the water. Steel hulls become magnetized during construction. The hammering, the welding, the shaping of metal, all performed in Earth's magnetic field, align the iron molecules within the steel. Even after a ship launches, it carries this magnetic signature, a permanent field radiating from the hull like an invisible beacon, and that signature is what's killing crews. Goodeve's solution sounds absolutely barking mad when he first proposes it. He wants to wrap entire ships in electrical cable and run current through them. Thousands of meters of wire coiled around hulls powered by onboard generators, creating an electromagnetic field that would cancel out the ship's natural magnetism. He wants to make ships magnetically invisible. The initial reaction from the Admiralty is about what you'd expect. Senior naval officers who've spent 30 years at sea are being told by a university professor that they need to turn their warships into floating electromagnets. Some think he's joking. Others believe he's wasted their time. One admiral reportedly asks whether Goodeve has been drinking, but Goodeve has the mathematics to support his proposal. He explains that every magnetic field possesses polarity, north and south. The ship's hull creates one field. If you generate an equal and opposite field around it, the two cancel each other out. It's the same principle as noise-cancelling headphones, except instead of sound waves you're cancelling magnetic fields. To the mind sensors, the ship would simply cease to exist. It would sail directly over the weapon, and the magnetic trigger would never activate. There's just one rather significant problem. Nobody has ever attempted this on anything larger than a rowing boat. Goodeve is proposing to degauss. That's the technical term named after the unit of magnetic field strength. Every single vessel in the British fleet. Battleships, destroyers, cargo ships, tankers, trawlers, thousands upon thousands of vessels, each requiring custom calculations, precise wire placement, and careful calibration. The logistics are staggering. And Britain doesn't have time. Ships are exploding daily. The magnetic mines are spreading to every major shipping channel around the British Isles. U-boats are already sinking merchant vessels in open water. Now ships can't even reach ports safely. If the Royal Navy spends months testing and debating Goodeve's idea, there might not be a fleet left to save. So despite the skepticism, despite the astronomical scale of the task, despite the fact that it sounds like something from an H.G. Wells novel, the Admiralty gives Goodeve permission to try. They haven't got better options. Sometimes in war you've got to stake everything on the mad idea. January 1940. HMS Vernon, Portsmouth. Goodeve and his team select a small minesweeper, HMS Border, as their test subject. They spend 3 days measuring the vessel's magnetic field from every angle, using sensitive magnetometers borrowed from university physics departments. Then they wrap over 600 meters of heavy electrical cable around the hull in a carefully calculated pattern, connect it to a generator, and throw the switch. The results are extraordinary. The ship's magnetic signature drops by over 90%. When they sail HMS Border over test magnetic sensors positioned on the harbor bottom, the instruments barely register anything. It's as though the ship has vanished from the magnetic spectrum. Goodeve's mad idea actually works, but success creates its own nightmare. One test ship is a proof of concept. Britain operates over 9,000 merchant vessels plus hundreds of Royal Navy warships, destroyers, cruisers, battleships, and countless auxiliary craft. Every single one requires degaussing if they're going to survive passage through British waters. And ships keep arriving daily. American freighters, Canadian escorts, requisitioned trawlers, emergency-built cargo vessels. The queue never stops growing. Goodeve does the calculations, and they're terrifying. Each ship requires approximately 600 meters of thick copper cable. That's over 5,400 kilometers of cable for the merchant fleet alone. Enough to stretch from London to Baghdad and back again. Britain's copper supplies are already strained supporting electrical infrastructure, munitions production, and aircraft manufacturing. Now Goodeve requires an entire additional supply chain exclusively for degaussing cable. Then there's the installation problem. You can't simply hire any electrician off the street for this work. The cable placement must be precise. Incorrect positioning, and the degaussing field won't properly cancel the hull's magnetism. Too much current and you risk starting fires or damaging electrical systems. Too little and the ship remains vulnerable. Each installation requires trained personnel who understand both electrical engineering and naval architecture. Britain doesn't have those people. The country is fighting a war on multiple fronts. Every qualified engineer is already working 16-hour days on radar, aircraft engines, gun systems or code breaking. Goodeve needs to create an entire degaussing workforce, train them in weeks and deploy them to shipyards across Britain and eventually allied ports worldwide. The Admiralty establishes degaussing stations at major ports: Portsmouth, Liverpool, Glasgow, Belfast, Cardiff. Each station receives magnetometer equipment, cable supplies, and hastily trained technical crews. Ships arriving in port are immediately measured. Calculations are made. Cable is wound around hulls, generators are installed. The entire process takes approximately 48 hours per ship if everything proceeds perfectly. It never proceeds perfectly. Ships arrive damaged from attacks, requiring repairs before degaussing can even commence. Cable shipments get delayed. Generators malfunction. Workers make measurement errors and must start over. And through all of this, U-boats are still hunting outside the harbors, waiting for degaussed ships to emerge and join convoys heading into the Atlantic. Goodeve realizes he requires a faster solution for the massive backlog of vessels. His team develops a simplified system called wiping. Instead of installing permanent degaussing coils on every ship, they create shore-based installations with massive electromagnets. Ships steam slowly past these stations, and the powerful magnetic field temporarily neutralizes their hull's magnetism. It's not permanent like proper degaussing, but it lasts several weeks. Crucially, wiping can process multiple ships per day instead of one every 2 days. Wiping stations go up at harbor entrances throughout Britain. Ships queue up, pass through the magnetic field, and receive temporary protection in minutes rather than days. By March 1940, Britain is degaussing and wiping ships faster than Germany can lay magnetic mines. But it's a desperate race against time, and the clock is ticking towards Britain's most critical hour. May 1940. Everything changes. Germany launches Fall Gelb, Case Yellow, the invasion of France and the Low Countries. Within days, panzer divisions have smashed through the Ardennes and are racing towards the English Channel. The British Expeditionary Force, nearly 400,000 men, finds itself cut off in northern France, trapped between the rapidly advancing Wehrmacht and the sea. The only escape route is Dunkirk, a small French port with a single harbour mole, a narrow breakwater extending into the Channel. The Admiralty initiates Operation Dynamo. The plan: evacuate as many troops as possible before the Germans close the trap. But there's a problem, a massive problem. To reach Dunkirk, ships must cross the English Channel, waters that German aircraft control, waters that are littered with mines, both contact mines and the deadly magnetic variants. And the vessels available for evacuation aren't just naval destroyers. They're merchant ships, fishing boats, pleasure craft, ferries, trawlers, the famous little ships of Dunkirk. Most of them haven't been degaussed. On the 24th of May, Churchill's War Cabinet receives a stark warning from the Admiralty. Without degaussing protection, a significant portion of the evacuation fleet won't survive the crossing. Magnetic mines laid by German aircraft in the Channel approaches will destroy them. But Operation Dynamo is scheduled to begin in 48 hours. There isn't time for proper degaussing installations. Goodeve receives an urgent summons to the Admiralty. The question put to him is brutally simple: can you protect 400 ships in 4 days? Under normal circumstances, the answer would be no. Absolutely not. Impossible, but these aren't normal circumstances. Goodeve's team works through the night, calculating, planning, requisitioning every available wiping station along the south coast. Portsmouth, Dover, Folkestone, Ramsgate, Harwich. They strip personnel from other degaussing stations, they call in every trained operator. They set up temporary wiping facilities using mobile generators and hastily positioned electromagnets. On the 26th of May, Operation Dynamo begins, and so does the most intensive degaussing operation in history. Ships arrive at the wiping stations in continuous streams: destroyers, minesweepers, paddle steamers, fishing trawlers, Thames barges, anything that can float and carry men. They queue up, pass through the electromagnetic field, receive their temporary magnetic protection, and immediately set course for Dunkirk. The wiping stations operate around the clock. 3 shifts, 24 hours a day. Exhausted technicians measure magnetic signatures at dawn. Cable crews work through air raid warnings, ignoring sirens. Because every hour a ship waits is an hour soldiers remain trapped on those beaches. Over the next 9 days, the 26th of May to 4th June, Operation Dynamo achieves the impossible. More than 338,000 British and French troops are evacuated from Dunkirk. Over 900 vessels of all descriptions participate in the operation. The losses are significant. German aircraft and U-boats sink or damage nearly 240 vessels during the evacuation. But here's the crucial detail that rarely appears in histories of Dunkirk. Not a single degaussed vessel is lost to magnetic mines during the entire operation. Not one. In 4 days, Goodeve's teams wiped over 400 ships. Every single one made the crossing without being destroyed by the invisible killers lurking on the channel bottom. Think about what that means. If those magnetic mines had functioned as designed, if the evacuation fleet had crossed without degaussing protection, Operation Dynamo could have been a catastrophe. Hundreds of vessels potentially lost. Tens of thousands of troops left stranded on the beaches, Britain's entire trained army captured or destroyed. Instead, the evacuation succeeds. The British Expeditionary Force survives to fight another day. And whilst many factors contribute to the miracle of Dunkirk, Hitler's halt order, RAF air cover, calm weather, the heroism of the little ships, degaussing plays a crucial, largely unrecognized role. Churchill addresses Parliament on the 4th of June, declaring that, "We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets. Britain will fight on," and a significant reason it can fight on is because a Canadian chemistry professor understood magnetism. But the war is far from over. France falls on the 22nd of June. Germany now controls Atlantic ports from Norway to Spain. U-boats can reach far into the Atlantic, and the Battle of the Atlantic enters its deadliest phase. Degaussing has solved the magnetic mine crisis. Now Goodeve's teams must scale the operation to protect the entire Allied merchant fleet. Not just for weeks, but for years. The real work is only beginning. By April 1940, degaussing stations are operating around the clock throughout Britain. 3 shifts 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Sparks fly from welding torches at midnight. Exhausted electricians measure magnetic fields at dawn. Cable crews work through air raids, ignoring sirens. Because every hour a ship sits waiting for degaussing is an hour it cannot carry desperately needed supplies. The Admiralty pulls workers from anywhere they can find them. Retired electricians are called back into service. University physics students are drafted straight from lecture halls into degaussing teams. Women joined degaussing crews in unprecedented numbers, operating magnetometers and calculating cable patterns. Work that requires precision and mathematical skill, not physical strength. By summer 1940, over 3,000 people are working in degaussing operations across Britain. The logistics are mind-bending. Cable arrives by the tarn at ports, wound on massive reels. Workers develop specialized techniques for handling the heavy copper wire. It's as thick as a man's thumb and weighs several pounds per foot. Getting it around a ship's hull means lowering crews on scaffolding along the vessel's sides, securing the cable with brackets every few feet, ensuring connections are waterproof and won't corrode in seawater. On a large freighter, the installation takes a full day of grueling physical labor. Then comes the testing. After installation, every ship must be measured again to verify the degaussing is effective. Ships steam slowly through designated testing areas whilst shore-based magnetometers record their signatures. If the readings remain too high, crews return and adjust the current, reposition cables, troubleshoot the system. Some vessels require 3 or 4 attempts before they're properly neutralized. The program expands beyond British shores. Canada establishes degaussing stations in Halifax and Montreal. American ports, technically neutral until December 1941, quietly set up degaussing facilities for ships that will join British convoys. Gibraltar, Alexandria, Cape Town, Bombay. Anywhere Allied shipping concentrates, degaussing equipment follows. Goodeve's team writes training manuals, ships equipment overseas, and trains foreign crews in the techniques. By the end of 1940, Britain has degaussed over 4,000 vessels. By mid-1941, that number exceeds 10,000. It's an engineering achievement that rivals building the ships themselves. Except it's being accomplished under wartime conditions with limited resources, constant enemy action, and the knowledge that every delay costs lives at sea. The numbers tell the story better than words. In the first 3 months of 1940, before degaussing became widespread, magnetic mines sink or damage 115 British ships in home waters. By late 1940, after thousands of vessels have received degaussing protection, that number drops to fewer than 20 ships for the same 3-month period. By 1941, magnetic mine losses become almost negligible, fewer than a dozen vessels for the entire year. Goodeve's mad idea has essentially neutralized Germany's wonder weapon. The Germans attempt to adapt. They modify magnetic mines with more sensitive triggers, attempting to detect even degaussed ships. They add acoustic sensors that respond to propeller noise. They combine magnetic and pressure detonators. But every adaptation requires new mine production and new deployment. And Britain's minesweepers, now that they understand the threat, become far more effective at clearing the weapons. The Battle of the Atlantic continues until May 1945. U-boats remain deadly until Germany's surrender. Over 3,500 Allied merchant ships are lost during the war, and 783 U-boats are destroyed. But the magnetic mine threat, that nearly paralyzed British shipping in 1940, never recovers its initial effectiveness. Goodeve's solution holds. Ships continue crossing the Atlantic, keeping Britain fed, supplied, and in the fight. Not because they're invincible, but because one less weapon can kill them. And in a war of attrition, eliminating even a single threat can mean the difference between survival and defeat. Charles Goodeve never becomes a household name. No monuments are built to honor him. No films dramatize his achievement. Whilst codebreakers at Bletchley Park and radar scientists at Bawdsey Manor receive post-war recognition, the man who saved thousands of ships and tens of thousands of lives remains largely unknown outside naval engineering circles. That's often how war works. The most crucial innovations happen quietly, solved by people nobody's heard of, whilst headlines focus on battles and generals. But the impact of Goodeve's work extends far beyond the Second World War. Degaussing becomes permanent naval doctrine for every major navy worldwide. Modern warships still employ degaussing systems, though they've evolved into sophisticated computer-controlled installations that continuously adjust to changing magnetic conditions. Submarines, which must avoid detection by magnetic anomaly detectors, use even more advanced degaussing technology. The same principles protect undersea cables, scientific instruments, and sensitive electronics from magnetic interference. Goodeve himself rose through the ranks. Director of Naval Land Equipment. controller of research and development for the Ministry of Supply. After the war, he received a knighthood and continued working on scientific problems until his death in 1980. His broader legacy lies in how he approached the problem. He didn't think like a naval officer, bound by tradition and conventional tactics. He thought like a scientist who understood that modern warfare increasingly meant fighting physics itself. Radar was turning air combat into an electromagnetic chess match. Sonar was making submarine warfare a battle of sound waves. And magnetic mines had weaponized Earth's own magnetic field. Victory would go to whoever best understood and exploited scientific principles. The Royal Navy recognized this shift. The Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, where Goodeve worked, evolved into a permanent institution. Britain established closer ties between universities and military research. Scientists stopped being treated as eccentric outsiders and became integral to defense planning. But perhaps the most important lesson from Degaussing is about institutional flexibility under pressure. The Royal Navy in 1940 was one of history's most tradition-bound organizations. Hundreds of years of customs, protocols, and established procedures. Yet when faced with an existential threat, when ships were exploding and conventional solutions weren't working, the Admiralty gave a university professor with a wild idea the authority to rewire their entire fleet. That kind of institutional courage is rare. Consider what Britain accomplished in less than 2 years. They took a theoretical concept, proved it worked, scaled it to thousands of ships, trained thousands of workers, established global infrastructure, and essentially solved a problem that threatened to starve the nation into surrender. All whilst fighting a war on multiple fronts, enduring bombing raids, facing possible invasion, and operating under conditions of absolute desperation. The convoys kept sailing. Britain survived. And though degaussing was just one factor amongst many, convoy tactics, escort carriers, long-range patrol aircraft, code-breaking, and sheer courage all played crucial roles. It eliminated one deadly threat at precisely the moment when Britain couldn't afford any more losses. On the 23rd of November 1939, Lieutenant Commander John Overy and his team spent hours in freezing mud, carefully dismantling a German magnetic mine by torchlight. Less than 72 hours later, Charles Goodeve was calculating how to cancel magnetic fields around ship hulls. Within weeks, the first vessels received degaussing protection. Within months, thousands of ships were magnetically invisible to the weapons that should have destroyed them. Sometimes in war, the maddest idea turns out to be the right one. Sometimes wrapping ships in miles of electrical cable and turning them into electromagnets is exactly what saves a nation. And sometimes the hero isn't the admiral on the bridge or the pilot in the cockpit. It's a Canadian chemistry professor who understood magnetism better than anyone thought possible. Britain didn't starve. The convoys got through. And decades later, every warship on Earth still carries Goodeve's invisible shield, not because it was conventional, not because it was proven, but because when Britain's back was against the wall, someone dared to think differently. And that made all the difference.